So we're just gonna hop right into this. And so what I would like to ask for all of the panelists is to really, we're gonna do a question introduction. So the panelists can pick either one of these questions and they'll have roughly a minute to answer. So we can start with something. Well, the questions are something you stopped doing during quarantine, or you can answer what is one of your life mottos or quotes. And we can start off with our lovely DJT.
Awesome. So I'll start with a quote. It's one of my favorite. It's "I'll find a way or make one." It's my motto from my college, Clark Atlanta University, and it's become a life motto.
And next we have Sierra Boatwright.
Okay, I'll stick with the motto question. My favorite motto is teamwork makes the dream work. Works personally and professionally. We can do more together than we can alone.
That was lovely. And Shelton Banks is next.
So I'm gonna go with what I stopped doing because of quarantine and unfortunately going to the gym. I've been on the struggle bus, not at the gym. Wish I was, but sad.
You're not the only one. Karen Jones.
Hi, everyone. I think I'm going to continue with Shelton and talk about something I stopped doing during quarantine. Actually, I stopped shopping luxury retail as much as I used to and really took a deep philosophical look at how much I really needed and don't need. So I think I'm ever changed by quarantine in that aspect of my behavior.
Thank you for that. And Sabrina Pierce, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I wish I had stopped eating so much during quarantine, but I'll share kind of my motto in life has just been about bringing the next group along. And so I've always said my goal is not to be the first, it's just not to be the last. Make sure that next group is coming in after me.
Thank you for that. Next, we have Washeen Nyanu. Hopefully, I didn't butcher your last name, but forgive me.
It's okay. It's watching Yanu. And I think my favorite quote is "Don't believe your own hype." Right? I think quarantine has showed a lot of people who believe their own hype, and then we all got humbled. And so the quote for me is "Don't believe your own hype."
Thank you. And lastly, on our panel is Sal Venegas.
Hi, everybody. So the thing I stopped doing during quarantine is driving. I had something like 28 days when I didn't get into a car. And then I finally did drive again, and it did not go well. I had kind of forgotten what I was doing. So no accidents, but you know, I learned I need to keep practicing skills in order to keep them fresh. So that was a good reminder for me.
Well, thank you, everyone. And we're just going to go right into our discussion. And so anyone can, this question is for all the panelists and anyone can go first. Can you sum up your job in one word or phrase?
I'll go first, Corbin, to try to sum up my job, what I do. Basically, my whole career has been spent actually in doing talent management. I reached out to Sal, but in a word or phrase, I think my job is to make people the best iteration of themselves and to see them be successful. That's what I do.
I would say my job is doing the absolute most, right? Like I feel like so I work in sports, I work for the WNBA, and at least this year with COVID, there were so many moving parts with how the basketball season was played and how we engaged with partners and athletes. And so this year I feel like I was just doing the most with the absolute least. Like that's the whole phrase, doing the most with the absolute least all year long.
I'll go next. I am a commercial real estate developer, so I would say a phrase that sums up my work is I make neighborhoods places where people are proud to live, work, and visit.
I jump in. So I would say conduct. I think about like an orchestra. Well, I don't get to like play the instruments anymore. I actually get to actually conduct the music and watch other people play and kind of tutor them and make sure they're playing their notes right.
For me, Karen and I are in the same field, and so mine is very similar, but I always say that I help people achieve their potential.
Okay, so since we're all going, all right, so I will go. My daughter makes fun of me when she hears me say this because I say it all the time. I'll use 3 words. My job is to touch, move, and inspire, right? And so for those of you all who work with me at Chicago Scholars, that's my word. Touch, move, and inspire is what I'm charged to do.
Well, mine is I sell groceries. That's probably the simplest way to put it. But I take these amazing brands from amazing entrepreneurs and I get them onto the grocery shelves across the country.
And I believe that was everyone. So going in, our next question. As Chicago Scholars, we describe strengths as superpowers, which DJT can tell you more about. As LaShawn has mentioned earlier, she has coined that for our organization. What are some of your superpowers that led you to that role you are in today? We could start with DJT, following Karen and Sabrina.
Oh, thank you for the question. So this term came from a TED Talk, a TEDx that I did about 3 or 4 years ago, and it was entitled Poverty as a Superpower. And in that talk, I basically shared that for all of my life, I looked at where I came from as a deficit. And I've learned to retrain my brain to see that my lived experiences are actually superpowers, right? The things that people like Karen and Sal look for in talent, what they call competencies, core competencies. We've developed that being the first. We've developed that coming from tough neighborhoods. And so one of my superpowers is that I figure stuff out. I think anything is figure outable, as they say. And it's really because my mother, today we say that there's no such thing as a dumb question. That was not true in my household. And so my mom would ask me to do something and I'd ask a question and she'd just give me the look, like, figure it out. And so I just knew, like, okay, well, let me figure it out. And so I figure stuff out. So I think that every problem has a solution. I'm committed to figuring it out. And that has become my superpower.
I think I'm next, Corbin, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, well, I'm so happy and blessed to recognize at this moment in time what I believe my superpower has been for all of my career, and that is I have the ability to create the conditions by which people can actually dialogue and listen and understand each other through what I do. And I think I realized it most acutely after the sad events that happened with George Floyd, and with such a polarizing political climate that we have. Everyone is just so polarized. And so what I have discovered or began to appreciate about myself is the ability to create conditions by which people hear each other out. And the magic, I believe, everyone, that happens in those environments that we can create is that common ground is discovered in the conversations that I'm able to help people to bring together. So I think, and I'm so blessed and humbled by the ability to just literally take people with very divergent opinions about things, very polarized views, and to create the conditions by which they can hear each other out and create shared understanding.
So I will answer that. I love that you guys asked this question because I talk about superpowers all the time, mostly because I'm a Marvel fan. Like, I'm a big movie goer, not necessarily the Oscar movies. It's like DC Comics, although Black Panther was Oscar nominated. But I always looked at this very simply, and it was actually how I describe diversity and inclusion to any organization. If you look at when superheroes come together, whether it's Avengers or Justice League, never do 2 of them have the same power, never. right? And the way that they're able to defeat whoever it is, whatever enemy they're up against, is by bringing those individual powers. It literally is the definition of diversity, and using those powers is inclusion. And so I always kind of looked at my superpower as the ability to see other superpowers and bring them along. So that's mine.
Thank you all for that. And hopefully the younger scholars will, continue hearing this on their journey, as I'm sure they will. For now, we are going to ask a pre-submitted question from the audience. What is the hardest part of being a CEO of color? And we have Sierra, Shelton, and DJT.
Okay, so I'm not a CEO just yet, but that's one of my goals. I'm the Vice President of Real Estate. I think one of the hardest parts of being in leadership of color is that you're not always taken seriously initially. I think oftentimes you walk in a room and you have to slide a business card to kind of command the respect in the room sometimes. I think that I have become quite savvy in kind of commanding a room, if you will, and kind of demanding respect. I watched the debate last week and how Kamala had to say, "I'm speaking." I find myself having to say that often, and I'm unapologetic about it. And so it's important to be respectful, but we absolutely deserve respect as well. And so I have learned as a woman of color in a white, male-dominated field, it's okay to speak loudly. It's okay to say, "Excuse me, I wasn't finished." And it's okay to kind of own the room. I worked very hard to get where I am. I've got a degree or two behind me, and I have experience that allows me to be in this position. And I'm not afraid to kind of say that. And so I've learned to say it, sometimes with a smile, sometimes without a smile. But I think that as a woman of color in a male-dominated field, it can be challenging. And I'm not pretending like it's ever easy, but I think I welcome the challenge, and I learn how to push back when appropriate, where appropriate, and I do it unapologetically.
I can snap to that. I think for me, so two things kind of come to mind. So one, the weight. So, this mentioned, I'm in the tech industry, and it's heavily dominated by white males. And so I know I don't speak for all people of color when I say things, but at the same time, I know bias does exist. And so if I do say something that's out of place, or if I don't come correct, then that bias can carry on to somebody that looks to elevate to the level of CEO. And you get statements like, not sure if many of you all saw, the CEO of Wells Fargo said, "We have a tough time finding people of color," right? And it's because they may not have seen, they bias exists, right? And so the weight that's carried of being a person of color in leadership is heavy, and so it's tough. And then the other piece is I have to dig for knowledge a little bit more than my white counterpart. So from a generational wealth of wisdom standpoint, my grandfather's father was a slave, and so I'm not able to go to him and talk to him about business. Either I'm not able to go to my grandfather and talk about business. I have to dig a little bit harder. Got to read books. So I got to dig a little bit harder for the generational wealth of wisdom. And so that's one of the hardest parts for me.
So I echo all of that. I think when I think about this question, I think about it as, it's hard enough being a CEO, right? And so I want to answer the question of just being a CEO because it's tough. I think if we were to take the answers from Sierra and Shelton, I think that could apply to any role as well. Just walking into the room, being Black or brown, it's just maximized at the level of CEO or of leadership. You hear things like, you take up space when you walk into a room. So that came a couple of years ago, and I laughed because I was like, I don't think that's a compliment. I wasn't sure. I hadn't heard that phrase before. It was the first time I heard it. And I know that I have a big personality and I do take up space when I walk into a room. And usually that's what my friends like about me, is because I'm the life of the party. I'm all that, but it's intimidating for certain people. And so there's something in your brain that says, should I turn it down? Is it too much for people? And so there's always this balance of like, do I lead with my authentic self, or do I, fall back to make other people feel comfortable? And so I've chosen to just walk in the room as I am, and let them deal with that. But, as I step back and think about just the role of the CEO, I'll just share, because I think there's a lot of different people on this call, but a couple of things that I think are really hard about it is that it's a really thankless job. People love this idea of being a CEO. But if you truly embrace being a CEO, it's a servant leadership role. So your time is not your own. Even your job is to give praise and celebrate others. You own nothing, really. You praise and celebrate others, but you accept all responsibility, blame, and anything that goes wrong. So if you're a good CEO, that's what you're doing. You're putting people out front, celebrating them, and taking responsibility for everything else. And so that can be thankless. And that was a challenge for me, because as a doer, the reason why I got to this place, because I was a doer, I always had a thing, right? And I did that thing well. I did that deliverable. I got it on time. It was high quality. And then when you become a CEO, you don't have one thing, right? You're responsible for something called culture, which is hard to measure, right? So if you think about it, that's the other hard thing about being a CEO, is you are the keeper of the culture, right? So we have a team of 50 people. I'm not responsible for hiring these people. So they all come in with their own issues, beliefs, thoughts, ideas, baggage. And I'm responsible for what they bring to the community, because I'm the keeper of the culture. And so it's such a dance. It's such a challenging thing to manage culture, because what is it? How do you measure it? How do you galvanize people around a set of values, principles, ways of being? Because that's the thing that, what they say, eat strategy for breakfast. And so I think those things, just in general, I don't care what color you are just really hard about being a CEO.
Thank you all for that. And I feel that that is something that gets answered a lot. And as DJT said, a lot of these answers can apply to really any role at any level for a lot of us. And next, this is one of my favorite questions I developed, especially one of the reasons why I created this concept for this panel. There's a myth that CEOs, executives have flexible schedules. Is this true? Do you have a typical work day? If so, what does it look like? And we'll have Serena, DJT, Sal, and Shelton answer this question. Whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, I think one of the things about being a CEO is that you kind of, especially starting a company and having an emerging company, you do everything. You are not only the CEO, you're the CMO, CFO, COO, head janitor, everything yourself. And so, I often think that if I put my hours into an hourly wage, I'm probably at like $2. You work a lot. There's flexibility in that you own your schedule, but yeah, you kind of work 24/7. I just am putting it out there.
I agree with that. I feel like it's almost a trick question, right? So it's flexible, and so I could take a break, but if I take a break too long, stuff won't get done. And so it's the balance of learning how you're responsible for managing your own schedule. Yeah.
I wanted to answer this question because I grew up in a town about 35 miles south of Chicago called Joliet. It was a steel town. My grandpa, my mom and dad, they punched clocks every day of their careers. And in high school, I had a friend who was like, "Oh, my dad is an executive at this company, and he just comes and goes whenever he needs to." And I was like, "Wait, what? How does that work?" And so as I grew in my career, that always stayed with me. And I learned that, yeah, I have a lot of flexibility as an executive. last week I needed a haircut. Things were getting a little bit out of control, and so I finally, took the risk and went in and got it cut. And I did that in the middle of the day because I had the flexibility to do so. But and if you looked at my day, you would see that I'm sort of in and out and doing things as necessary when I need to. But if you really look at my day, you'll see that I'm sometimes up at 5 a.m. talking to my team in Europe. And I'm sometimes on a call until 10:30 at night talking to my team in Asia. And I'm on those days full time working with my team here in the States. And DJT said it, that's because as you become more senior, as you become a more senior leader in any organization, whether it's one that you are starting up and running yourself, or whether you're in a big company like Walgreens, your job more and more becomes about supporting others and making others successful. And so, they need you when they need you. And it's not about your time anymore. It's not about you and what you need. It's about what they need and how you make them and the company you're with a success. And that means you've got to have flexibility. And so, I always think about it to that superhero conversation. With great power comes great responsibility. I think about with great flexibility comes a lot of work. And so you just got to be ready for that as you grow in your career.
Sal, you summed it up perfectly. That's exactly right. That was my only point leading from the last thing I shared, is that it's about everybody else. But being a CEO for an organization like Chicago Scholars is very different than being the CEO of my own company, right? So to the point that was made, servant leadership, my schedule, literally from the time I wake up till I have one more call after this one, like I'm in back-to-back meetings all day, every day. And that's a choice because I choose to serve and lead. But in my own business that I have, kind of my own side hustle, I can work in the middle of the night, right? I can do what I need to. I do think that there is flexibility, and I have a mantra that I share with my team, and I try to encourage them to operate like this. Many of them don't take me up on it, but what I will share is that, I don't have to ask your permission to do this work after 5 o'clock. Right. And because I don't need permission to do this at home when we were in the office. So if I need to go to the gym or the dentist or something during the day, I'm not asking for permission either. Right. Work and life has been blended for long before the pandemic. And so it's been a long time since I've had very firm 9 to 5 hours. And so I bring life into work and I bring work into life. And so that's just what it is. And any place that I've worked, that has to be a part of the culture. And so I lead that way, and I encourage other people to advocate for themselves and what they need.
If I can just add, the thing to be careful about though is that you let work take over your whole life. And for me, as growing up as a person of color, I always found some of the comments that we heard earlier really resonated with me, that sometimes you have to work harder, you have to feel like you have to really push and do things. And so I did that for a long time in my career. And one day I was with my 2 daughters. I was at a volleyball game. My older daughter's 14 now, was playing. My younger daughter's 12, pretty little. I was watching the game and I was really into it. My younger daughter walked up to me and said, "Dad, why aren't you on your phone?" And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, whenever we're here, you're checking your email, you're on your phone." And it just was like a stab through my heart. And I realized that I was letting work take control of my life, and it was affecting my family and their perception of me. And they are 100% the most important thing in my life. And I think in most people's lives, work is really close. I mean, I really love my job and the work that I do, but it was in that moment that I had to make a decision about what kind of leader I wanted to be, not just for my team, but for my family. And so I chose on that day to on weekends, I turn off my phone. Everybody knows it. The only one that has my cell phone is my very close team and my boss, my personal phone, and they can call that one if they need me, if there's an emergency, but they're usually very respectful about it. And they know I'll check email maybe once a day during the weekend. And at night, when the kids were little and when it was bedtime, I would spend time with them. I really focused on that. You have to make those decisions and really think about those things. Otherwise, it is really easy to let it get out of control.
I love that story, Sal. And so in that, setting those boundaries are so important, especially when you start to have a family. And so a good mentor of mine shared that early on. And so I have a daughter who's 11, who is an only child, and so really wants my attention. So I set a rule that I don't talk on the phone in the house. Now, this is pre-COVID. So I would take all of my phone calls like in the car, in the driveway, at the door, so that when I walk in, like it's free. And so what's been interesting is that since we've been working from home and she's been doing school, she sees me on the phone and she's like, but like, what about me? And so I don't know what to do now because those boundaries are like all mixed up, but it is definitely a life lesson to learn early.
And that, on DJ T's note, is a perfect segue into this 2020 having been an unprecedented year. Kind of like, what are y'all lessons learned while navigating this new reality as everyone is trying to deal with this and try to, save organizations and um, kind of, navigate through everything that's going on. And we have Sierra and Sala up, and then anyone else who wants to answer after that.
Yeah, I'd say the biggest thing I've learned this year is to grant grace and give space. I think that we are all navigating these really difficult times in our own way, in the best way we can. And I think about that both professionally and personally with my team, with my colleagues. We're all just dealing, right? We're kind of building this plane as we fly it. We're trying to figure it out as we go. And it's important for us to just be respectful and grant a little grace here and there and give space for people to navigate it how they see fit. Personally, as a mom, since we're talking about our little ones, I'm a mom with 2 little ones, and I've had to learn to just relax, take it easy. They need grace and space too, right? We're navigating this e-learning world. I'm working from home. I'm sure you can hear them in the background. They don't understand quiet after 5 p.m. They should. They're old enough to do so. We'll have discussion after this call, but it's just important for us to just give grace to one another. We're all figuring it out. We're asking a lot. I recognize I'm asking a lot of my team, my colleagues. Working remotely is not easy. I used to wish I had the type of career where I can work from home. I can't wait to get back in the office. I miss my office. I miss my team. I miss the collaboration that comes from being together. And so I think the other lesson that I've learned is you just have to be thankful for what you have when you have it, because when it changes, you really miss it. So grace and space is really my motto for 2020.
Yeah, for me, I've learned something about others and I've learned something about myself through this whole thing. And about others, as I've worked with the team around the world and they're all facing the same issue, the interesting thing about COVID-19 is that it is kind of a unifier for people around the world. We're all dealing with it. And what I learned is people around the world are more similar than dissimilar in so many ways. They all care about their families. They all worry about their families and their friends and the loved ones, and want to make sure that they're safe and they're well cared for. They worry about whether they're going to have a job tomorrow, and whether things are going to take a turn for the worse. And for me, the ability to have conversations about these world events, and to really just listen to people. That's what people really need in these difficult times, whether it be COVID-19, whether it be the racial equality movement. All of these things just require, Sierra, I love that word, space, that phrase, space and grace, because it requires that we practice that, and that we recognize that people really do want the same things out of life. About me, I realized I just got to be okay with who I am, and because you can't hide it when you're working from home all the time. I never worked from home before we started this. Occasionally I would, but it was almost never. And people are going to see things about your life that you probably didn't want them to. They're gonna catch you leaning back and screaming at somebody to stop doing it, or the dog jumping on you, and you not having a good reaction. And so if you're not really comfortable with yourself, then you're gonna have some difficulty in this. The other thing I'll say, Sierra, your comment about going back, we actually have been going back a little bit at Walgreens. The offices are open, nobody's required to, but if you choose to, you can go back with limitations. And it's weird, but I've done it a few times. Yesterday, I happened to be in the office and I ran into a colleague that I've worked with for years. I do talk to her pretty regularly. And both of us, I really almost started crying, because we were just so happy to see each other, and that connection was so important. And so that's the other thing I've learned, is just that human connection. Nothing really replaces it, no matter how great the Zoom call is. connection really matters. And so seek that however you need to for your own mental well-being. Really seek those connections because they're so important. At 6 feet and wearing a mask preferably. But
Corbin, I can answer that. And I think because there's a mix of people on the call, and I think what I've learned during COVID is what actually matters. I think when you're starting out your career, there is a ton of pressure to fill it with a lot of stuff, right? So you have a ton of events, you have a ton of people, you're networking, you're doing all these things. And I think as COVID has started to force us to slow down and really take stock of what are the things from life that's pre-COVID that you're actually missing, and what are the things now that you're like, I actually didn't need that, right? So as you all are thinking about your careers, it's a lot easier to set priorities now than try to remove them when you've developed the habits. And so I think one of the lessons that I learned is that I was filling my life with a lot of stuff, right? Like pre-COVID, I could not keep a plant alive. I got 8 plants that are thriving right now, right? Because your girl is out here being a plant mom, because being at home and prioritizing certain things have now shown up at the top of the crop of these are the things that matter. So as you all think about what you're choosing to put your attention towards in COVID, really spend some time thinking about what it is that you want to prioritize for your own life and career, because it's easier to do it now without the CEO title, without the senior executive title, and you can start to fill your life with and careers with the things that actually matter.
If anyone else doesn't have anything to say about this, we can move on to our next question, which is also another pre-submitted question from the lovely audience. And this question is, how did you find your why or purpose, or realize what it truly was? And this is for Karen and Shelton.
The story of my why is, it's going to give you all a little bit of a chuckle, but many years ago, I was working for American Express Corporation and doing something that had a sales orientation to it, part of it. And so at that point, my district lead came to me and she said, "You don't really like sales, do you?" And I said, "No, not really." She said, "Because you're kind of not good at it at all." But she said, what you are good at and what I see in you is the ability to teach people and how to train and how to create a good culture and how to motivate people and things of that nature. And hence it set my feet on my why. And I ended up being a talent management and learning and development professional throughout my career, which is, as I stated, with finding my life purpose in seeing other people be the best iteration of themselves. And so, so that was my journey to being able to do that, to be able to accept my truth, to be able to take the feedback of a person who I consider at that point to have been a mentor, to take the tough love and to really apply it into something where I could really leverage my strength. And I'm so happy for that conversation because it set my feet on a more than 20-year path of something that I really love, that I didn't know existed. So, so that was my story that I wanted to share.
So I struggled with finding this for some time. And so I am a sales guy, and in the sales world, we're all fans of Simon Sinek, who does the Start with the Why video. And so he breaks it down. And I didn't like his illustration because I struggled. I was like, I want to be the best at this. And that's my purpose. And it wasn't to a mentor. He approached me about something else. He approached me about corporate governance. He was explaining to me the purpose of an organizational chart for a business. And so I kind of applied it to myself. I said, if I'm a business, if I'm the brand, and my goals or my purpose are my employees, who would be my CEO goal or purpose? Like who would every other goal report to in this org chart, right? And I struggled. So I said, I said family, everything else will report to family. I would do it for family. And some things couldn't report to family, like the work-life balance can't report to family. I got to keep my job and family ideally separate. I struggled. So I left out the CEO, but then I started to say who reports directly to the CEO. And 2 things kept coming up. Meaningful relationships was a goal of mine, and purpose for work. I said, I always want to be able to build meaningful relationships. I always want to have purpose for work, and I could apply that to everything in my life. So my family is built of meaningful relationships, And it takes a lot of work to run a family. My job is, I love to create meaningful relationships, and I do purposeful work for my job. Every other thing in my life consisted of meaningful relationships and purposeful work. But I said, like, who do they report to, right? And it came down to something really simple. I said, my goal, my purpose is that I want to be happy. And everything else connected to it. I said, meaningful relationships and purposeful work make me happy. And so instead of making happiness a byproduct that I was searching for, of like, oh, am I happy now? And I'm doing this and I'm doing that. And I make a lot of money, but am I happy? It's like, oh, no. Now I kind of go with life with the intention of like, all right, is this going to make me happy? Right. And if it doesn't involve meaningful work, meaningful relationships and purposeful work, then it's probably not going to make me happy. And there's no need for me to kind of go down that path of figuring out if it's going to work to make me happy, because I don't want happiness to be a byproduct, right? So my goal, my purpose is to be happy. And then everything else, every subsequent thing, every byproduct, including money and kind of everything that comes with it, come as it may.
So I love this question, and I love how everybody defines it differently for themselves. I'd say a couple of things. I'd say we should always be asking ourselves this question forever and ever. I want to ever stop asking myself, who am I and what is my purpose? And I've been asking myself that for a long time. And I think, I started to get close. I started to feel like I was close when I would find that I would lose myself in something that I was doing, that I would forget to eat, that I would look up and it's 3 o'clock in the morning doing something, that I would find immense joy, or I would also think about what fired me up, what I got angry about. And so when I think about, for me, my purpose, it's not a title, it's not a job title, right? So right now I'm the CEO of Chicago Scholars, but when I think about my purpose, I say my purpose is to fight for the rights of marginalized people, right? It is to uplift the genius of Black and Brown people. It is about racial equity and justice. It is about making sure that there's equitable opportunity for people who look like me, for people who look like you. And I get to do that as the CEO of Chicago Scholars, but I also get to do that as a speaker, as an author, as a consultant. I can do that in a lot of different capacities. And so what I've learned to do is to not associate my purpose with a job title or a vocation, because we're going to be temporarily, like we're all going to be moving in and to and through different companies and organizations our whole life. And to tie it to one industry, one company, one organization, your whole identity will be shook when you move to something else. And so what is consistent is my purpose, kind of my mission for my life, and that is to fight for Black and Brown people and uplifting their genius.
And so I guess my take on it is slightly different, because I feel like your purpose can change based on the season of life that you're in, or the purpose that you choose to prioritize, right? And for me, purpose it's always seemed like such a big thing that it got overwhelming. It's like this one big thing that God put me on this earth to do. And because I'm not there, all these things happen. And so what I've focused on is alignment, right? And I can usually tell if I'm not aligned by how I feel in my body, right? Am I not wanting to do this? Do I not want to get up and go do this work? Do I not want to answer emails when I get it? Am I not excited about it? And typically to me, that's a signal that I'm further away from where I'm trying to go, as opposed to getting closer to it. And so I try to listen to my body, listen to my energy, and figure out, I don't know where I'm going necessarily, right? Because if you would have told me 5 years ago that I would be a sports executive, I would have laughed. I don't even like sports. What? Cut it out, right? So I could not have pictured the life that I'm living, but I've listened to my body in the seasons of life, right? And so if I'm feeling like I'm getting further away from my North Star, typically I will start to feel that. And so I focus on, do I feel aligned in whatever season that I'm currently in? And if I don't, what do I need to change to get closer to alignment?
And thank you all for your answers, because that was the answers were just as brilliant as the question itself. And our next question really is a hard-hitting one. Can you share a time when you had to take responsibility for a mistake either you have made or an employee, and how do you recover from a situation like that? And we have Serena, Sierra, Sal, and watching up.
So I will kick it off. First of all, there's been a lot of mistakes. And I love this quote I heard a while back about failure isn't the opposite of success. It's actually part of success. But I'll give a story from Frito-Lay. Many years ago, I ran sales for North Texas and Oklahoma. And it was one of those years where I got into the NCAA, was working with the Oklahoma Sooners at the time. And this particular season, they were going to win the championship. Everybody knew they were going to win the championship. And I went to the Tostitos brand, and this was before they got bigger into the NFL that they are now, but NCAA. And I went to them and I said, you know what? I think we should do a commemorative Frito-Lay Tostitos OU Sooners bag. And I had the team change the bag, change the color, put the logo, congratulations Sooners. Now, mind you, we were halfway through the football season. So go through the football season, they won every game. They get to the division, they lost a game. They get to the national championship, and my husband and I are at the game. And the plant was ready for my 11 p.m. call because I ran the bags, I ran everything. So the night of the game, thousands of bags were being produced in the Tennessee plant. Okay, they lost the game. So what was I supposed to do? And every senior vice president of Frito-Lay was at this game. And throughout the game, they kept looking back at me in the stands. After halftime, now their spouses are looking back at me at the game, like, what did she do? And so it was a big mistake. It was a risk. It was one of my first big responsibilities in my sales role at Frito-Lay early on in my career. Well, fast forward a few months, almost a year, unbelievably, I was still in this job, thank God. And season was coming around again. And I said, I'm going to try this again, but I'm going to do it a different way. And so I went back to the brand. They're like, I cannot believe you're asking me to do Sooners bags again. I said, yeah, but this time I want to just put the season, put the schedule on the bag, still put the logo, still do this. And it was the biggest program that we had ever done for the NCAA or anything with Tostitos. And customers were literally coming into the grocery stores, going to the back room, buying it in cases. So all of a sudden I went from, okay, who is this girl, to a hero, right? So my biggest thing on you've got to take risk, you've got to have some failures, and you got to step right back in there. It was a good idea. I executed it wrong the first time and I owned it. And my senior vice president saw that. And that was like one of my first roles at that company. And, my career grew from there. But you have to own it, risk, take the risk and be bold.
I guess I can go next. So when I said in the beginning, like my quote is, don't believe your own hype. And it's because your girl was feeling herself early in her career, right? And I remember when I first started working for Yahoo, I managed the number 1 and the number 2 revenue generating accounts in all of North America. And in the beginning, I think I was like, I felt that pressure. I was doing a great job. Obviously, I believe in excellence. So the work that I put out was great. Like, we grew the accounts. And because I kept getting a lot of praise, I got comfortable. And towards the middle part of me being there, I had one of our admins look over something that I should have. They put a decimal or they put a comma in the wrong place. And it was a mistake that could have cost the company $1 million on one deal, right? And it's because I was comfortable, right? I'm like, I got this, I can do this in my sleep. I'm getting all these awards, the bonuses are coming, I'm taking trips, I'm doing all these things. And instantly people were like, I thought she was one of the good ones. Like, what happened here? Are you not careful, right? And so I think the lesson that I learned from that is, one, like once you feel yourself starting to get too comfortable, you need to assess what you need to do to grow. What new challenges can you take on? Because when you are in your comfort zone, you make mistakes because you take things for granted, right? And you're not as careful as you were in the beginning parts. You don't feel like you have to prove yourself. If you couple that with being in your early 20s, I thought I was rich. I was making six figures. Like there was just so many things that came together to create somebody who thought that they were like superhuman. And I think in that moment, I learned like, one, it's really important to have a reputation of excellence because you get grace, right? So it wasn't that like they knew that this was something out of the ordinary for me. And so I was able to keep my job. I was able to fix it because I couldn't pay that $1 million back because I didn't have it, right? Like, so I couldn't write the check. So I had to figure out how we could recover that money from the partner. But I think the lesson that I learned there is you're never too good to do what is expected of you, right? And what you are being tasked to do and what you are being paid to do, it is your job to make sure that you are doing that and that you establish a reputation for yourself so that when you do make mistakes, you have the grace that's built in. I've never made that mistake again. I doubled and triple checked things and all of that. But I think early on, it was just something that it was a lesson, a potentially expensive lesson. But I also think that something that I learned is that you can recover, right? There are a few things that you're going to do that are going to be so detrimental or so egregious that you can't recover from. So be open to the lesson, right? When it happened, I was like, I'm never going to have a job. I'm never going to work in New York again. And it was bad. I was embarrassed, but I took accountability. I was able to course correct and ask for help. And because of that, I was able to recover.
Okay, I think I'll go next. So a mistake that I've made in my career and kind of what I learned from it. So in commercial real estate, when you're planning in neighborhoods, you can have some really great ideas. And I had a really great idea for a particular project. And this is going to be amazing here. And this is what we're going to do. And it's going to impact so many residents and create so many jobs. And I had a colleague who I value as a mentor now to say, that's your idea, huh? Did you run it past the community? Did you make sure that that's what they wanted? And it humbled me, right? My idea was great, but for who? For what community? Who has to live in this? Who has to kind of navigate through this space? And luckily, my great idea didn't get so far before I had to step back and make sure that I was planning with the community versus making a plan for a community. And for me, it could have been a terrible mistake because it could have backfired. The community could have said, this is not our priority. We don't need this. We don't want this. Like, how dare you come into our neighborhood and tell us what's best for us? And so for me, it was a learning opportunity. It was a teachable moment, and I learned so much. And so now, as I think about commercial real estate development, no matter what neighborhood I'm planning for, I'm actually planning with that community, right? I'm doing the legwork. I'm talking to stakeholders. I'm talking to the folks that have experienced decades of disinvestment so that I can make sure that they're benefiting from the influx of investment that we're bringing. And it's actually for them, not for the people that are coming later, but for the people that reside in the neighborhood now. And so, I mean, it's a small example, but it's something that I carry with me every single day in my career. Let me make sure that I'm planning with folks and that they have agency and they're making decisions, and I'm not making decisions for them that are going to affect them and generations to come.
So for me, I was pretty early in my career at a company that I'm not at now. I had a situation where I was running a pretty major project. We used e-learning, online learning. At the time, it was really novel and new. Not every kid in America was doing it like they are today. And we had a major deliverable due to a big banking client in New York. And I'd worked with them for a long time. And I knew that it was going to be hard to get this thing out. And I knew the team was overworked. They were exhausted. And I pushed to get it out. And so we did something that was worse than not delivering it. We delivered a quality of product that was not good. It had bugs. It was a software package, basically. It had bugs. It wasn't working. And I, even when we put it out, I knew it was a problem. And because of a number of different pressures, I made the decision to go forward with it. I tried to explain it. And things didn't go well. The client was unhappy. I had to sit in front of them and apologize, and I had to take ownership with them. But then what happened is my boss at the time called me into her office, and I thought, I'm going to be fired. This is it. I'm out of a job. And she brought me in and sat down and said, what happened? And I said, this is my fault. By the way, everything in me was screaming to say, like, here are all the reasons I couldn't do this. You didn't give me enough resources. You didn't do this. You didn't do that. You know, it was early in my career, and that's sort of where I was going. My head was at the time. And I made the decision just to say, this is my fault. I should have recognized that it was a problem. I should have talked to you about this. Even though it was late at night, I could have called you. Here are all of the things that I would do differently. And she kind of smiled and said, yep. And it seems like you've learned a couple things. And I said, yeah. And she said, that's what's most important in this. We'll recover. We'll be fine. It's most important that it doesn't happen again and that you learn from it. And that's been a life lesson for me as I've worked with my colleagues. You know, I always tell them, listen, you can always make a mistake with me. And as long as you learn from it, we're going to be good and you're going to have a great career. If you make a mistake twice and it's the same reason and all the same things, then we'll talk. But it will be a talk. But what's most important is that you learn from your mistakes. And I really, Karen was this manager's name, and I really respect her, and I tell her every time I get a chance to connect with her what a difference in my life and as a leader that experience made for me.
Okay, we're starting to wind down on time. So I'll ask for the following questions, the last questions, like to just give a minute response. And as well as the audience, please start prepping your questions, put in the Q&A if you haven't done so already, so we can jump right into live Q&A. So one of the last questions are, when have you given or received poor feedback before or during your experience as a CEO or executive? And we have Karen, DJT, and Watson.
Okay, I think that the story that came to mind, Corbin, when I saw the question was at a time when I did not receive feedback, I think, as a senior leader, which is detrimental. And I don't know if my my esteemed panelists agree, but sometimes as a senior leader of color, it can be even more challenging to get the feedback that you need than some of our contemporaries I have found through my career. So I think the time that came to mind that I wanted to share was when I didn't, and I actually pursued trying to literally implore people to give me feedback that I needed to be successful, and even to this moment, don't know why. I think in retrospect, I didn't receive the feedback that I needed, but hence I just went about the task of really trying to broaden who I go to receive feedback from. Sometimes if my direct manager doesn't provide it, and I found, I don't know if the panelists agree, the higher you go, sometimes it can be even more challenging to get the direction that you need to be successful. Sometimes people are more comfortable talking about you than to you when in organizations. So all of those dynamics are at play. But being able to, I think, do more of an informal 360, multidirectionally, trying to talk to peers, assessing how you can be better. So that was what came to mind that I felt compelled to share about the lack of feedback and how it can be a challenge and what to do about that.
So I think a lot of times we think that getting feedback is hard, but I think we underestimate how hard giving feedback is, especially as a leader. So I'm actually going to talk about an experience today, giving feedback on something that Sal just mentioned that he did early in his career. So there was someone who I'm trying to hire, and as opposed to saying, I need more time, he made a presentation that is going to get him not hired. Right? As opposed to knowing and asking for the time that he needed to put forward a product that was the best representation of himself, he decided to rush through something and made like rookie mistakes. And it's someone who I actually really wanted to give this job to, but because of a choice that he made, so I had to give him that feedback. And it's balancing not crushing someone's spirit, but giving somebody the tools that they need to not make those same mistakes again. And I could tell that he really wanted the job. I could tell that, like, if he had just asked me for what he needed, he probably would have knocked it out of the park. But for whatever reason, he made a different choice. And so moving forward, the lesson that I hope he got from the conversation today was, if you are not ready for an opportunity, take the time that you need to put your best foot forward, because now the only thing that I have to go and make a decision on was what I saw today. And it was tough. Like, I thought I was done interviewing. I just knew like I had my person, and it just didn't pan out in the way that I expected. And so giving that feedback was hard, because like this is like third rounds of interviews. But it was really hard. I could tell he was sad. I could tell that like he knew that he hadn't done what he needed to do in order to, like, it was his job to lose, and he lost it. And I think in that moment, it was really tough to be like, right? Like it didn't feel good. And it was right before I got on this call with you all. But I think in that, like, it's just, for me, it's a balancing act of knowing that like that person isn't bad. They just didn't put their best foot forward in that situation. So how can I give feedback to make sure that they don't repeat that same mistake again?
So feedback, this is one of my favorite, it is one of my favorite topics. As Chicago scholars, we say feedback is love, and that is certainly what I embrace. I think we all are incredibly busy. And so if somebody pauses long enough to give you some feedback, to Watchen's point, it's harder to give it than to receive it, right? Because you care about relationships. You don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. You want to maintain that relationship. And so, but sometimes people need the feedback. And so in the midst of that back-to-back calendar that we're talking about, if somebody pauses long enough to say, let me watch this person, let me have something meaningful to say, let me follow it up with some specifics, examples, and suggestions, not just pointing out the bad, but some suggestions for how you can improve this, like that's time, that's love. And the only way that I do that is if I care about your growth and development. What I will share is that the only way that I have gotten to be in a role in a seat of CEO is because I've sought out feedback. Most people will not give you feedback. That's what I've learned. They will not, especially if you're a person of color. And a white man told me this. He says, we don't. We had a candid conversation. He says, because I'm afraid of a lawsuit. I'm afraid that there's going to be some HR implications. And what usually happens is that those people are counseled out and it's considered not a good fit. But people who look like them, they get that coaching, they get that feedback, they get that insight. But if you're a person of color, you will find very few people are going to give you that. And so for me, I am always trying to create an inner circle of people to say, hey, I'm working on this thing. If I'm speaking, I have my trigger words, right, whatever. Give me some feedback on that. Or I'm going to have this really difficult conversation. I want you to sit in this meeting with me. Tell me how I could have handled it better or differently. So I identify people that I trust. I ask them specifically to watch me do something, to observe me over time and space. And I give them permission, right, to give me some feedback. And, one piece of advice that I continue to share, and I'll close out on this, is, one of my favorite mentors and former boss, as she was observing me once, she says, Dominique, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective? And I had this propensity of wanting to be right. So it's like, but it's wrong. I need to tell them that it's wrong. And I would do my head like that. So she's like, you can't do that all the time, right? Do you want to be right or you want to be effective? And think about what the end goal is. And that's just some feedback that just stuck with me, is about what do I want? What's my desired outcome in that moment, and keeping my eye on that desired outcome when I walk into rooms and not getting caught up in whatever the style is perhaps that is given. But that's some feedback that I've been given from a close mentor, being right versus being effective.
Okay, and so for this last question, I just want to take 2 minutes to get through this, even though this seems to be a very, very popular question. So please, panelists, as we can get into the live Q&A, I see the chat box is already coming up. So can you share some tips on climbing up the ladder of leadership and how to gain experience? And we can start with Shelton, then DJT, and then see if anyone has any last thoughts, but then we have to jump into Q&A.
So I would say learn something from every step on the ladder. So there were jobs in my career that I hated. I was a server at Applebee's. I hated it. But now looking back, I learned something from that, right? And so I would say learn something that will prepare you for the next job. Oops, sorry. And then the other thing is be intentional. So I would occasionally look at job descriptions that I probably wasn't ready for, and I would see what was required, and I would try to learn that in my current role, right? I would ask my manager and say like, hey, can I take on this additional responsibility so that I can learn how to do this to prepare me for the next role?
So every ladder is not going to have all the rungs in it, right? Like I think we have this visual that like it's like a straight climb, and you do sometimes it's more like a jungle gym than a ladder, right? Where you're trying to figure out how you're going to navigate and put the pieces together. Don't let that deter you. Sometimes you're going to have to stretch a little further to catch that next rung. That is part of the process, right? Just make sure that you are building a community and a tribe along the way, and that your reputation is one of excellence. I'm telling you guys, that is going to get you further than how smart you may be, right? Or how like you need to be those things, but the reputation that you establish for yourself. I think I always say that decisions about your career are going to be made when you are not in the room. So make sure that when you're not in the room, people are saying the things that you want them to be saying about you.
There's a concept that Carla Harris, I don't know if you've all heard her speak or read any of her books. She talks about performance currency and relationship currency. And she says that in the beginning of your career, it's all about performance currency, right? To Watchen's point, be excellent, right? Your work has to speak for itself when you are not in the room. If somebody asks you to do something, you do that thing and then some, right? You make sure that you are meeting those needs on time. If you have ever uttered the word, that's not my job, that you're not on the path to leadership, right? That just excludes you right there, because you should be thinking about how to add value and not just about your linear role. And so that's one piece. But then they say after, a couple of years, that performance currency has kind of a diminishing return, right? And then it becomes about relationship currency. And this is about the relationship. It's about the people now who are in that room talking about your work, but they're talking about the work and they're talking about your character and how you do that. And so one of the things that I think for people, and there's some folks on my team who are amazing at this. LaShawn is one of them. Amber's another one on here, but they master people. They master people. And what they do is they figure out what your needs are, what your desires are, what your pain points are, what your stress points are, and they respond to that. They meet those needs. They take away a stress point. They anticipate what you might ask, right? So being a master of people, that will change the game. If anybody anticipates my needs and knows like what it doesn't take a lot. You just have to know that I need the talking points. I need the PGO. I need it in a one-page document. I need a text reminder to be there on time. Like whatever the things that are my triggers, just know what I need. And it's different for everybody, but it requires you to pay attention. And people will remember you for making their lives just a little bit easier.
One thing I'd like to say, Corbin, and I know you're about out of time, but I love what you were saying, DJT. And I always kind of looked at it this way, putting pep in your step. And pep for me was PEP. The first P is performance. That's the foundation. And a lot of us think that's enough, and it's not. The E, exposure. Are you working the room? Do your senior leaders know you? And then the last P is perception, managing that perception. That's getting feedback and all of that. So my pearls of wisdom I learned from Carla Harris is how I internalized it, was putting pep in my step.
So thank you all for that. And we're just going to jump right into Q&A. So LaShawn, you can feel free to kick it off wherever you feel is best.
I would love if folks can come back on video and maybe unmute yourselves and give our panel a round of applause. Thank you all so much. It's so good. We can keep on going, but I know folks are tired. But so we have a question from Kenna. What is one thing about your job that keeps you going when you get frustrated or tired of your job?
Answer. So real estate development, when I drive through neighborhoods and they're lacking amenities and resources that many of us take for granted, that we just kind of have at our disposal. it keeps me going. It makes me realize that the folks that live in Inglewood deserve, you know, a Whole Foods. We were the site developer for that Whole Foods on 63rd and Hosted. It makes me say they deserve a Whole Foods just like the people in Lincoln Park do. The folks in Pullman deserve a community center just like the folks in Evanston have. And why can't we have that? We certainly can. It might take a little bit more effort, but with commitment and a long-term approach, and a focus on equitable development, they certainly can. So I think that's what gets me going. Driving through Chicago's neighborhoods, seeing the kids that are playing at the Pullman Community Center and seeing that they own this space. When I see folks that are shopping in Whole Foods and Inglewood, it makes me feel proud. It's not about me, it's about them. And it's about providing some really dope resources to these neighborhoods that deserve it most. And that just need it. And so that's what keeps me going. It's the people, right? It's the people. It's not the buildings. It's not the places. It's not the spaces, but it's the people that get to occupy those spaces.
For me, go ahead, Karen.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'll go very quickly, but one thing that keeps me going, particularly with the blessing of being a diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner, is when I got my first executive job, my grandmother said something to me. She said, "Baby, I'm so proud of you because the only thing I could have done in that office is clean it." And I'll never forget that because, you know, the people that paid it forward to us so that we can be where we are. And so that's what keeps me going when I'm ready to punk out and say the politics is too much, it's too hard. I know that a price was paid for me to be where I am.
Love it.
I was just going to say, for me, it's that, you know, Walgreens is in every community in America. We serve healthcare needs of everyone, and we really have a great deal of care for people. And our CSR efforts, giving flu shots, over 1 million flu shots a year to people in countries that don't have access to vaccinations, all of those things are things that keep me going. But what the reason it does is because it's very aligned to my personal values. These are things that I believe in, the need to care for communities and the need to take care of people that don't have the opportunity to care for themselves. Walgreens does that. And so my advice is, wherever you end up, find a place that speaks to your values and that is aligned to how you view the world. And in those tough moments, what you'll find is that alignment to values will carry you through because you know that you're in the right place.
And I'll lastly say the work that I do today is going to determine if, when you have a daughter or a niece and they want to be a professional basketball player, that there is a place for them to do it, right? So it's not for right now. It's to make sure that if you have a daughter and she wants to play basketball, she doesn't have to play 9 months in Europe because she can't make enough money to live just on her WNBA salary right now. So for me, it's more about the future generation of women who, if I give up now, I'm part of the solution to a long-term problem. And so I think that that's what keeps me going.
Great. Amber, I'm gonna jump to you. As you said, you had a question. And there was also a question that Amy shared. Do you have any recommendations for books on leadership, professional, personal growth? If you all can drop those recommendations in the chat for everybody, that would be great. And then Amber, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, thank you, LaShawn. Hi, thank you all so much. First of all, this was amazing. This was so very humanizing. In my role at Chicago Scholars, for those of you who don't know me, I do support the president and chief operating officer and the CEO, Dominique. Thank you for the shout out, Dominique. I appreciate it. I wanted to, sort of just say, like, in my role, I do see a lot of the vulnerability of the executives. And there's just so much that I wish that I could tell the rest of the staff in order to better be able to support them and to create better allies for our executive team. So my question to you all is, what are some of the things, and Dominique, you already sort of answered this with your response around feedback. What are some of the things that you either wish that you could share or tell your staff that would support you? Or what are some of the things that some of your staff members or team members are already doing that support you in your work, and even emotional support, which is also really important?
I'll start. Pay attention, right? Like, pay attention. As you are supporting someone who's senior, there are tons of things that they're juggling. After some time, you should be able to recognize some patterns that they have, right? So when I'm busy, the girl who supports me, like, she knows how to pack or not pack my calendar based on what's happening. She knows that if I haven't eaten, I'm going to act a certain way. So it's like she's paid attention long enough so that she can, 9 out of 10 times, she can tell people how she thinks I'm going to respond, and she's going to be right. And it's not because she's asked me and I've written it down on a piece of paper and like handed it over to her. She's just been very intentional about paying attention around how my success is measured, because she knows that if I'm successful, I'm going to make sure she's successful. So I would say just pay attention.
A core value at a previous job that I had was think like a CEO. And I think about that now because like one day I want to pass this on to somebody else. Like I want my staff to like be a CEO somewhere else. Like I want them to elevate. And so like it kind of requires them to kind of think like it, right? They got to take the initiative and want it. And so think like a CEO, think outside the box. Like I want to get you there, but you gotta meet me halfway.
Great. Well, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So as panelists, if you can spend the last minute dropping any books recommendations around leadership, personal, professional development in the chat, and we can make sure that we share that out with all of our participants joining us. But thank you all so much. Corbin, I don't know if you wanted to say a few words before I close this out.
Yeah, no, I just want to say thank you to everyone who joined us today, as well as our lovely panelists. Again, it was kind of like an idea I had, and Chicago Scholars, as LaShawn said, seems to embrace my ideas frequently. And I really enjoyed what all the panelists had to say tonight, and I really appreciate giving your insight to me, to others, the young professionals, including our college and our high school scholars who are also here with us tonight. So thank you.
Great, and just to echo that, thank you all so much for joining. I have dropped the feedback survey in the chat, so please do take a few moments to give us some feedback. Feedback is love at Chicago Scholars, and so we want to make sure that the future events that we'll have 2 more sessions in the Failing Forward Leadership Series. So we want to make sure we capture some of that information so we can pass on for the next events. Thank you all again, panelists. You all have been amazing. We will have an optional networking that's starting at 7:05. So if you're interested, feel free to stay on. If not, then have a great night and we will see you soon.